and welcome to our OKS King's Talk tonight, titled From Kings to Kites. I am Greg Hunter and I'm the Deputy Head Co-Curricular here at King's. Retired Wing Commander Ryan Mannering completed a mechanical engineering degree at Cardiff University before joining the RAF and spent 22 years flying fast jets operationally across the globe. Ryan was the last ever RAF Tornado display pilot, and after his distinguished career, he transitioned to commercial flying as an airline pilot, flying the Boeing 737-800. He is a former member of Schoolhouse, and he left in 1994. Interviewing him tonight is his original removes tutor and still current maths teacher here at King's, Andrew McFall. Tonight's talk will take two parts. Firstly, Andrew will interview Ryan, and then he'll be taking questions from you, the audience. Please, at any time, type your questions into the Zoom Q&A function. Or alternatively, when it comes time for questions, put your virtual hand up and we can put you on to ask your question directly of Ryan yourself. And now it is very much a warm welcome to both Ryan and Andrew. It's over to you. Thank you, Andrew.
Well, good evening, and many thanks to Ryan for joining us tonight. It's 31 years, I think, since we first met, when I joined Schoolhouse in January 1991, and yes, you were one of my removed tutees. And I'd taken over from a guy called Peter Johnson, who needed quite an easygoing tutor set, and that's exactly what I got. And you were a very easygoing bunch of people. And it also included Grant Chum, who of course has just funded the new Pupil Social Centre. I remember the housemaster at the time, Andrew Dobbin, once said to me, he said, I bloody wish that Ryan would just do something wrong for once. And I think he had to wait until 6A when you were head of house and led the house into the house song competition with a thinly disguised pop headmaster at the time, singing Old MacDonald Had a Farm. I just wanted to start off, if we divide the talk into several parts, we can talk about your time at King's, we can talk about your time in the RAF, we can talk about the commercial flying, and then we'll fling it open for questions. And I hope that there will be questions. And I would say also to people that you can ask Ryan anything, and he will have good answers. Constrained only, obviously, by the Official Secrets Act, but there's no official secrets. What would you say were the best things you took away from King's? And I don't mean the silverware, but I mean your memories of King's. Just maybe 2 or 3 memories of King's.
2 or 3 memories of King's. So Schoolhouse. So obviously, I have to give a shout out to any Schoolhouse chaps who are there. So obviously, but my mates. I think that's the first and abiding memory. Who are still mates now. My best friend from school, Henry, who we shared rooms from Shells through to, well, 6A when we got our own rooms. But we shared rooms and we were best mates and remain best mates now, that's fabulous. The CCF was great. The RSM at the time was a splendid fellow, as you remember.
Yeah. And
I think the final memories, and this is almost in reflection, is how much King's offered me. It was great. It was a great place. I loved, obviously, schoolwork, so we'll put that to one side, but all the extracurricular activity events I could do, and all the sports I could do. It was a great place. And as when we were chatting earlier, again, I boarded my house. My parents were 5 miles away, but I didn't want to go home. I stayed at school because I had such a great time at school. So, but yeah, my friends, my really good mates at school.
And I think, I mean, as far as I remember, you started flying at the age of 12 and then got your private pilot's license on your 17th birthday. Do you think it was ever a case that you would not end up in the RAF?
A fortune comes into a lot of it. So yeah, I was clearly very passionate to be a pilot. So since I was as young as I can remember, I was one of the lucky ones who knew what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I think because I saw books, I saw airplanes, and I just wanted to be a fighter pilot. That's all I ever wanted to be. And when I arrived at school, Andrew Dobbin said, well, if you want to be a fighter pilot, then you need to focus on the sciences. And school positively encouraged me to go down that route, follow that route. and support me in every way, which was fantastic. And then learning to fly at mine and my parents' expense, and then getting into the RAF was half luck, half commitment. I sold myself to the RAF because I was so keen and desperate to do it. But equally, there's a very small box that you have to fit through, whether that's medically or otherwise. So if you don't fit those medical criteria, some people are just unlucky. I was the lucky one that, that this box is quite small. I managed to fit through all the other hoops and get through that final one, which is normally stops a lot of people. So hard work and luck. So, and then once you're in the RAF, you make your own luck at that point.
And do you think, I mean, these days, do you think Andrew Dobbin would still be right about science-based or?
No. So in those days, we focused your academic education on the sciences. So, well, you need to do maths, physics, chemistry, go off and do an engineering degree because that's what the RAF would like. So, I mean, if you want to become an astronaut or a test pilot, then absolutely aeronautical or some form of engineering or physics is definitely the way to go. And if one was going to pursue a route to becoming an astronaut, which is becoming more open these days, it wasn't open in my days, then route to becoming a test pilot and then an astronaut, you need to have that specialization as a pilot. Otherwise, you go in as a non-flying member and then you specialize in other areas of science or medicine. However, on reflection, knowing what I know now, I did an engineering degree. I would have either done a law degree or a languages degree.
Right.
Doesn't say that I didn't use my mathematical knowledge from my engineering to help with some of the flying, but it's definitely not required. Absolutely not.
Right. Excellent. Well, so we've talked about King's, and I have to say, from my point of view, one of the things I love about King's is the fact that over 31 years, we've actually had quite an enduring friendship. And I should point out, I went to Ryan's 21st birthday, I went to your wedding, you're my son's godfather, and here we are, still talking 31 years later. I think that's really quite a quite a unique kind of thing, really, that we have at King's. I even trusted to go flying with you twice when you were 17, which I think we've discussed in the past, was it brave or stupid? But I'm still alive. Would you like to now talk us through your career in the Royal Air Force? Obviously, we've heard the background to it, but would you like to tell us just a bit more about your time in the Air Force?
Absolutely. So I left King's and went off to university. I was very lucky that I was sponsored through university. So I had what's called an RAF cadetship. So I was paid to go to university by the RAF. With that came the concomitant requirement that I had to give so many years service thereafter. So I committed myself to 16 years in the RAF for that privilege. But after university, I then joined the Royal Air Force. I did my officer training and then I did my flying training. At the end of the flying training, you could go one of three ways: fast jets, helicopters, or multi-engine. I was streamed fast jets, and it ultimately led me on to flying the jet that you see behind you on the screen. And if everyone can see that picture of me with the dog, that's in Afghanistan, and a friend's puppy for a school picture to the weirdest place that their pet could go. I ended up flying Tornado GR1s and GR4s, which is a bombing version of the airplane. And then from there, I spent the next 15 years on operations, whether that's in the Middle East, Gulf War II, operations over Libya, operations in Afghanistan. And that was both as a pilot, but also on the ground. And that's the diversity of a military career. So I qualified as what's called a forward air controller. So I was trained to be on the ground, directing the bombs in. And that led me into all kinds of awkward situations. And I also trained with the airplane that you can see on screen now behind the big airplanes called an A-10. That's a tank buster. I did an American forward air controlling course in that airplane. So learned to do it with the Americans, and that found me on the ground in Afghanistan. Equally, I also found myself in New York in the United Nations conducting defense diplomacy. But overall, over the 22-year career in the RAF, this picture you see on screen now, that was the bulk of it, flying that airplane. I was lucky enough to fly the Eurofighter Typhoon for a tour as well. I did a couple of what we call desk jobs, so where you don't fly an airplane and you support the wider defence community. So I did a couple of desk jobs as well. And I was also lucky to go to a military university where we do postgraduate education. So I studied for a master's in international relations as well before leaving. So a real broad church of flying operations on the ground, a lot of focus in the Middle East. So Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and then at the very end of my career, supporting operations in Syria against Daesh. So it was a real broad church. Again, this is a nice one that just demonstrates some of the ceremonial duties that we do, but this was in fact my wedding with a guard of honor. Yes, yeah, it was a good day. It was a good day, a fantastic day. So yeah, that's the RAF in a nutshell. And that's the less salubrious side. That picture behind you, or the picture on screen now, is when I first arrived in Afghanistan. That was my home for a couple of days, where you could see daylight, wind, and when there was a sandstorm, you couldn't see from between those two bunk beds. So not always that nice. And
going back to the previous photo, obviously Jane, your wife, was in the RAF flying the Sea King. How was it for family life in the RAF? How easy was it to have a sort of a normal family life? You don't have a normal family life. So you commit to a service life, and it's very different. So as you said, Jane was a search and rescue pilot flying the yellow helicopters, the Sea King. She's still a serving squadron leader in the Royal Air Force now. She's a qualified flying instructor. So she teaches the young officers from all three services before they then get streamed onto one of the three types mentioned earlier. But what it meant was, after we got married, we went to New York for 5 days for our honeymoon. When we landed back at Heathrow, I drove up to Scotland to my base, and Jane drove down to St Morgan in Newquay in Cornwall. And we separated. I went straight off to Iraq, and then we saw each other about 4 months later. And what it always meant was that we spent a lot of time commuting, which puts a strain on. But if we were lucky enough that we were committed, that we're still together. And there's a nice picture of us with our eldest daughter doing a Remembrance Day service. So that's Lauren. That's Lauren, yeah. That's Lauren when she was about 4. So we spent a lot of time apart. Then when we had a family, Jane sacrificed being a search and rescue pilot, which she loved, to become a flying instructor, because her search and rescue duties were shift work. Overnight, she'd be 24 hours away. And we moved down south from Scotland to Lincolnshire so I could fly the Typhoon. And then Jane took on the home role, actually. So she took the hit, and I was often away. But the RAF were accommodating. So when one of us was away, they wouldn't send Jane away. So there were a couple of times where, before children, Jane was in the Falklands and I was in Afghanistan or Iraq, for example. But then one of us stayed at home, and if Jane was away, I would sort of shield myself from work. And the military can be flexible like that. Yeah. But it's not without its challenges. And ultimately, the reason I left the service was because it was putting a pressure, and I wasn't seeing my children. Lauren, as you see in that picture, by the time she was 6, that was a couple of years after that, I'd been away for 3 years of her life. So I'd only been around for half of her life. And that was ultimately the catalyst for leaving the RAF. Whilst I loved it, I wasn't prepared to compromise service life for my family life. And that gets to everybody at a point. And I chose family at that point. But it must have been an awful lot of fun, and clearly flying's in your blood. So you've made the transition to commercial flying. I'm sort of running through this reasonably quickly so that I can give everybody else opportunities to ask questions, because I'm sure that, excuse me, I'm sure that lots of people will have questions that they want to ask. Otherwise, I'll just keep asking my own. And obviously, the transition from flying the Tornado to flying the 737 is going to be different, very, very different. How do you find it? Do you still get the buzz from flying, even though you can't sort of barrel roll and bomb people? Yeah, do you know what? I do actually. I love flying jets. Don't get me wrong, flying jets is great. And there was a certain set of flying skills that we had in the RAF called operational low flying, where you would fly down to 100 feet at 600 miles an hour in the UK for practice. And on operations overseas, you're allowed to go as low as required to
achieve the operational effect that you needed. And that is just, it's licensed hooliganism. It's every pilot's dream. And as a display pilot, which you mentioned earlier, I was allowed to fly upside down at 100 feet. So, you know, things like that are just great fun. However, commercial flying is completely different. It presents a completely new set of challenges. As a fighter pilot, fast jet pilot, I'm there to deliver operational effect, whether that's a bang on the ground, a noise on the ground, whether I'm destroying a target. I don't care about money. I don't care about fuel. I care about getting the job done. If I break the airplane on the way, I don't really care. And if something goes wrong, do you know what? Worst case, I'm going to eject. I put my hands, if I'm in Badlands, in the hands of the Taliban or somebody else, which is a risk I take, and I'm trained to deal with that. Whereas in the commercial world, flying, it's completely different. Yeah, it's very mundane. It's not aggressive, fancy flying. There's a lot of use of automation, autopilot. But there are commercial challenges. So the new challenge is making sure you don't crash it into the ground. So all the lockers open and all the passengers scream at your horrendous landing. And for the company, so they can make a profit, I do the most efficient descent I can do, for example. So it sounds a bit boring, but for a pilot, actually, it can be a wee bit challenging at times. So, and what it affords me that the military doesn't is a slightly more stable lifestyle where I know I'm not going to be in Syria on the ground, holding a rifle where I probably shouldn't be, or flying over Afghanistan getting shot at again.
Yeah.
And it affords me the family life that I wanted. So I'm home all the time. I see my children all the time, which is ultimately what I wanted, to be fair. And don't get me wrong, I miss flying jets. I miss the camaraderie. And one thing that cannot be replicated, although Kings comes a very close second, the friendships and the bonds you forge in the military, and particularly in operations and in combat, are everlasting. But you know what? They're as strong as the friendships I had at Kings. That shows you the sort of mindset. So the schoolhouse gang, do you know what? That strength of friendship is same as my strength of friendship of the guys I first went to war with.
Yeah. I was just going to, thinking about one thing you've just said, I was just going to mention 4 words to you. And I said at the start that we have to be very careful about the official secrets, but I'm just going to say 4 words, which are survive, evade, resist, extract.
Yes.
Are you allowed to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What do you want to know?
Well, it's essentially being beasted, isn't it, by your own side? Yeah.
So you learn. So the training involves around preparing you for capture. And if I go back to when I did my initial training, it was called something slightly different, and it was called R2I, Resistance to Interrogation Training. And when I did my training, we were taken down to Cornwall in the depths of winter. We were left on the moors for 5 days. So we were in pairs. We ran at night, so which meant we had a hunter force trying to capture us, and our brief was to evade them. So we didn't want to get captured, because we got captured, we got taken back, and the whole point was on day 1 we started at point A, and by day 5 we had to be at point B to be picked up, and that was our escape route. Every time we got captured, we got taken back so many miles. And it's wet and it's cold and it's miserable and you're tired and you're a little bit scared because you don't know what's going to happen. But ultimately you get, over those 5 days, you get worn down a bit, which is what they want you to do. They want you to be cold, wet, tired and hungry. So you're a little bit emotionally compromised and you're a bit physically compromised. And then you always get picked up. That's the whole point. And then you get taken into an area where you are taught resistance to interrogation techniques. So we were then tested with interrogations, made to feel desperately uncomfortable, cold, and it's an experience I would not want to repeat. But the biggest thing is, if you're ever going to get captured, if you wanted motivation not to get captured, that was a good one. So whenever I had a crewmate and we were on operations or war, we always had a plan of what we were going to do. But equally, it prepared you for probably the harshest realities that could be out there. But we were trained in the time when there was a regime. So we would have been picked up by a regime, an Iraqi regime, which had a structure. If I was picked up by Daesh, or if I was picked up by the Taliban, then do you know what? All bets are off.
Yeah.
I'm sure we've seen some of the horrendous things that have happened in the Middle East. So not something I really want to go into, but it doesn't bear thinking about.
Yeah.
And with the proclivity of the internet, what can be displayed, what would worry me more now is, or did worry me at the time when I had a family, was not what would happen to me, but what potentially might be seen happening to me. And that's, I wouldn't wish that on anybody.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the questions are starting to flow in. So I'll just pick some questions, and let's kick off with one from Marcus Jarrams. And during your service, which aircraft did you prefer to operate and why?
Tornado, because that's the first fast jet I ever flew, and you flew as a crew. When you go through flying training, I'll be brutally honest, the best guys went single seat. And when I went through training, I wasn't good enough to go single seat, so I was sent to a 2-seat airplane, probably so the navigator could keep an eye on me. However, flying as a crew and as a team, the sense of satisfaction and teamwork of getting a job done, because the airplane, although there are certain circumstances where there is a pilot related event, one of which is strafing, so using the machine gun, which is primarily a piloting event, everything's done as a team. And the satisfaction of landing from a very complex mission, having done it as the pair of you, is great. And you know what? Some of my best friends still from the military are navigators, actually, because you know what? We flew together, took ourselves into those situations where we scared ourselves or hairy places, and we managed to survive and got the job done. So that's desperately satisfying. So yeah, without a doubt, the Tornado GR4. Although the Typhoon is like a rocket. When I first flew the Typhoon and I was allowed to use the afterburners for takeoff, it's I didn't stop giggling. And before I knew it, I was about 20,000 feet going supersonic, and I managed to gather myself and then start flying the airplane again. So I sort of stopped behaving like a child at that point.
Yeah. Okay, another question then from, let's take one from Matt Hillier. So Ryan, Matt Hillier here, same years at school. I've seen you flying with Jim Turner, OKS, commercially. Is he the best pilot you've flown with? And is this just a bit vanilla after what you've both achieved?
So Jim Turner and I, so Jim and I, obviously, as Matt knows, hi Matt, good to hear from you, and congratulations on the headmastership, by the way. So is Jim the best pilot I've ever flown with? He's right up there without a doubt. Jim is an amazingly capable individual, yet he's staggeringly frustrating because he just takes everything in his stride and he's so unbelievably relaxed and chilled out. But you know what, that picture you probably saw on Facebook was probably one of the best commercial days out, because he was a good friend who we've known for years. We knew each other. I followed on his heels into the RAF. And you know what, as a crew, we operated seamlessly. We really did. So that was fabulous. Is it a bit vanilla? It's not war fighting. It's not gung-ho. It's not aggressive, but it presents its own challenges. And for when you get to a certain stage of life, do you know what? Yes, I miss flying jets, but I don't miss being shot at and being scared at and living on rations and other things. So no, it's not vanilla. I genuinely enjoy my commercial flying job. It's full of completely different challenges that I've never had to deal with as an aviator before, requiring completely different skill sets, which is great for me to keep the grey matter still working. So yeah, if you gave me a Tornado and handed me some G suits and a helmet, do you know what? I'd be in it like a shot, but I wouldn't want to do it for the rest of my life again. I really enjoy what I do now. And I'm very lucky that I enjoy what I do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Anonymous question now. Could you have, and did you ever want to, fly in the Red Arrows?
Do you know what? I came very well. Interesting. So that's a very good question. So I was lucky enough to do the Tornado display. So I got to display the Tornado. And when I was doing the Tornado display, Jim Turner, OKS, was in the Red Arrows. He was in the synchro pair, so the guys who do the upside down crazy passes.
Yeah.
And I did a display for the Red Arrows family day. So the Red Arrows have their families at their base, and we did a display, and I got to go flying with Jim. in the Red Arrows. And it was a case of, mate, are you going to hear Jim to me saying, mate, are you going to apply? I was like, oh, I don't know. I was like, I'm not sure I'll be good enough. Do you know what? And a lot of it is personality driven. So I had seen the Red Arrows guys, and they work so hard, and they're a very talented bunch of individuals. And it was, I hadn't seen Jane all summer. So she was in the Falklands, I was away every weekend. And on the assumption that A, I'd been good enough, and B, I would have been accepted by the team. So you have to pass a flying test, and all the members of the team have to accept you. Had I passed both those, which was by no means guaranteed, would I have wanted to be in the Red Arrows? Oh, yes. I chose not to because I thought, you know what, I didn't want to do display flying for another 3 years. Do I look back and go, wish I'd done it? Yeah, sometimes I do. But oh, gosh, I don't know. It was one of those things where I really, really enjoyed being on the front line. I loved being on operations, not as a warmonger, because I was doing the job that I was trained to do. I loved doing that. I'd done the display flying thing, and I didn't want to do it for another 3 years. Like I say, I may have never even got into the Red Arrows. So, but I still sometimes sit there today, especially when I chat to Jim and go, oh, I wonder if I should have done it. Don't know. There we go. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. So another question then. Hi, Ryan, and this is from Robert Clayton. Good to hear from you after 25 years, and I'm delighted that your enormous passion for flying at school was fulfilled. What do you make of the school CCF no longer having an RAF section, and how can schools in general promote the virtues of the flying career without such exposure to the RAF and flying? So, sort of a question fairly close to my own heart as well.
What do I think about not having an RAF section? Do you know what? It reflects the modern times. Defence is always taking cuts. So, and do you know what? Defence is often a place where cuts are taken at the first time. So I can make my peace with it. If somebody's genuinely committed and wants to join the RAF, they will. If there's some form of military activity that they want to do, then hey, that's great, they can do that. If not, they can find it elsewhere. With respect to promoting aviation, it's an interesting one, because as I've got older, I've sort of thought more about aviation. Yeah, absolutely promote aviation. Aviation is taking leaps and bounds in, you know, airplanes and guzzling fuel and its impact on the environment and everything else. So, but you know, the leaps and bounds in technology we're taking, it presents a different picture. So should the school advocate for aviation? Yeah, if we're looking at STEM activities and promoting not diverse thinking, but alternative thinking, then absolutely. How else can you do that? I don't know. I mean, is there still the Wednesday afternoon clubs? There used to be a list of clubs that you could choose from that you could do, of which CCF was one of the options. If the school has that, then there's no reason why there can't be an aviation related themed club and or activity to promote it. And I'm sure there are certain establishments that would accommodate supporting that. And equally, there's enough OKS who are probably willing to put their heads above the parapet. So look, I'll support any questions or requests for support to join the aviation community and pursue that as a career. I, for one, openly now will say, if anybody wants to contact me about a career in aviation, whether that's military or civil, I will happily speak to anybody at any time.
Okay, well, I've got another anonymous question here, which is an interesting one. Can you describe the difference in the handling of different aircraft, the Tornado versus the Boeing 737, in a way that those who've never flown could understand? As a challenge.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think so. So flying a fast jet is, I would probably say, quite agricultural. You've got to be quite aggressive. You've got to be quite forceful. You've got to be quite demanding. You've got to show the aeroplane who's boss without trying to be too flippant about it. It requires big movements. It requires very positive, confident use of the controls. I'll caveat that with, you need to have a very fine understanding of the limits of the aeroplane, because if you're too aggressive and confident, you can make that aeroplane what's called depart control. So it will then flip and spin and put you in a situation where it could be terrible. Whereas with an airliner, you need to be gentle, you need to be calm, you need to be cool, and you need to be smooth, because it's not designed to be handled. a fast jet, a fighter fast jet, is designed to be unstable, so it can be maneuverable to do the job it needs to do and is handled accordingly. Whereas an airliner is designed to get airborne very gently like a bus. And probably the best way of describing it, although I've never driven a Formula One racing car, is probably going from a racing car to driving a normal car. Yeah. If the person who's asked the question is a driver or of legal driving age. If it's not,
Right.
then I apologise.
Okay, quick one from Mark Belsey, another former tutee in the schoolhouse. What led you to ending up in the fast jet stream rather than one of the other two streams?
So I was lucky enough to pass the elements of flying training. So when you go through flying training, you're graded. When I went through, you had to meet certain criteria of handling ability, spare mental capacity, and what's called airmanship, to demonstrate that you could handle the requirements of flying a fast jet and deal with the inputs that required fairly confident levels of situational awareness to deal with all the inputs. I was lucky enough that I managed to get across that bar to fly fast jets. So there's a required standard. You obviously get a choice and a preference, but ultimately the service has a choice. So even if I'd met those standards and there were no slots to fly fast jets, and there are plenty of people out there who were good enough to fly fast jets, but there were no slots at that time, ended up flying multi-engine or helicopters. So I was lucky that I met the requirement, or my flying ability was good enough to get over the mark, and B, there were slots available for me to go and fly fast jets.
Okay, now I've just had a message that someone has got their hand up, but I can't see it. So I will look for that when I ask a question, or maybe Greg can bring them in. But in the meantime,
yes, they're on, ready to ask the question. Yep, please go ahead.
Okay, so here we go.
Merlin?
Oh, hi. Yeah, it's Martin. Can you hear me all right?
Yes,
perfectly.
Yes. Yep.
First of all, Ron, I want to say thank you so much for your talk. It was really fascinating to hear about your military career. And I wanted to ask you a bit more about the commercial aviation side of things. So I left King's in 2013, and I'm actually now doing a commercial airline course. I've got about 4 flights left until CPL.
Oh, cool.
Really enjoying it, but obviously it's been a huge mess with COVID and delays as well from my training school.
Yeah.
And I was part of a cadet program, but obviously we lost the tag last summer because they said we can't offer you a place anymore because we don't have those positions.
Yeah.
So yeah, also I'd love to hear more about your airline career, but I was just wondering whether you had any kind of specific advice about what I should do in the future.
Right. So are you about to do your, sorry for everybody else who this is going to be a bit boring, but are you about to do your CPL skills test? Is that next?
Yeah, CPL skills test, then MEIR, and then the jet orientation stuff. So pretty much near the end now, finally.
Right. Well, without being too gratuitous about it, it's all about the money at the end of the day and how long you're prepared to wait. So the market will recover. That's a simple fact. The airline market has traditionally and historically gone in cyclical periods of up and down. Pandemic notwithstanding, that has just exacerbated a tremendous down. So what there is in the UK is clearly a surfeit of pilots and no jobs. So depending on where you are, it's just the luck of the draw. So depending on what you're prepared to do and whether you're able to do it and wait out for the situation, is my advice would be, there are a couple of airlines, and you know, I'm more than happy for Greg or Andrew to pass on my details and we can chat offline at greater detail if you wish. But look at airlines, but see where you could potentially go globally, because you may have to do that if you want to get some experience. But equally, there are many opportunities in other areas that can then lead you on to, if you're specifically looking at commercial flying, whether that's, you know, BizJet and or, you know, commercial airlines like my airline. So, but I think sit tight, give it a year, 12 months, and then the market's going to explode and open, and you need to be in the right place at the right time, which requires you to actively monitor the pilot recruitment market and be ready to pounce.
All right, that's really good advice, and that would be great to talk separately. Thank you very much, Ryan.
No, I don't know how we would do that, Andrew. Can you or Greg make?
I'm sure that
Marlene?
if they send an email to me or Greg, we can pass it on.
Yeah, more than happy to chat, and we can chat at length about that, and I can give you some more pointers if that helps.
All right, thank you. That'd be great. I'll send an email off. Cheers.
Lovely.
Okay, I've got two quite closely related questions. One is from Henry Murch.
Hey!
Henry's here. And Henry says, "Hi, Ryan. My son, Robert, would like to know what is the highest G-force you have experienced?" And then a related question from Matthew Knight, who was Schoolhouse 89 to 94, regarding the high G-force centrifuge that you instruct on. Is human endurance in this experience increasing? And if so, why do you think that that may be? So is human endurance increasing? And for Henry's son, Robert, what's the highest G-force that you have experienced?
So to answer Robert first, 9G, so 9 times the way, 9 times gravity, and it is miserable. It hurts, and it hurts like hell. And if you're in, that was pulled firstly in a centrifuge when I did my centrifuge training, and also flying the Typhoon. And when you practice aerial combat, it's called dogfighting or basic fighter maneuvering, you end up pulling a lot of G, and it hurts. It's as simple as that. It's absolutely brutal. Although there's a lot of equipment that helps, and it gives you what's called the Geasels, and that's where your blood vessels, your capillaries burst, and it looks like you've had measles. And to answer Matt Knight's question, no, physiologically, there is a limit to which the body can endure, and 9G's it. And what that means, therefore, is ultimately the human will eventually be out of the flying equation. I think my children now are probably going to be the last cadre of humans who are probably going to be flying combat vehicles. The technology has got to a point now where you don't need to have a human in the loop. The facility to manage and fight aerial systems is sufficient that actually you could probably take a human out of the loop in this generation. And equally, that's the same for commercial, and that's the next one. It's for commercial aviation, there is going to be a step change at some point, and I don't think I'm ready to fly an airliner without a pilot in it, but at some point our children or our children's children might be happy to do that. But again, that's another debate. But yeah, to answer the question, 9G, the human body is, unless it evolves accordingly, and I don't think it will, not in our lifeline to say more on that, because physiologically it's just not possible.
Okay, so I'm going to pull in a question now from Alison Hunter, who who describes herself as an old OKS, probably not as old as me. First generation Tredescant. My son is at Gordonston, located under RAF Lossiemouth. He's applying to the RAF at Mo. How do you feel when you're sent on a mission to kill?
Good question. So let's put this in context, and I'll give you two scenarios. One is a Middle East Gulf War II type scenario, where I'm presented with my mission planning pack, and my target for tonight is an air defense operations center, for example. So I'm going to fly into Iraq, and I'm going to drop a bomb on that air defense operations center. In doing so, there'll be 4 airplanes probably doing it. There'll be 4 of us. There'll be a formation of 4 airplanes, 8 individuals, and our job will be to destroy or effectively stop that communication center doing its job in order to protect other forces going in and doing their job. So that, for example, will have an enabling effect somewhere else on a bigger piece of the operation. So we're always a small cog in a bigger operation. I don't go out thinking that how many people are going to kill. I don't want to know. And when intelligence offer, I had a situation once in the Middle East where an intelligence officer, younger than me, more excitable than me, said, "Oh, do you know how many people died in your raid tonight?" I was like, "I don't want to know. I'm not interested. The target, we did the job. The bomb went on the target. It achieved the job. Fine, move on. That was it. I'm not interested in the detail in that." There was a slightly more different scenario, and I'll take you to Afghanistan in this example, where 2 tornadoes, 4 crew members, and our job is to provide cover for British Army troops on the ground, supporting a convoy, doing whatever they're doing. They come under fire, and then they ask for an attack. So we have to come in, whether we do a rocket attack, a strafe attack, or a bomb attack. I can justify my actions based on the fact that I'm defending someone else. And ultimately, there is a job to do. And when joining the military, there is a certain acceptance that if you end up at the sharp end of the spear, you will have to take life. That comes with the territory. It's not pleasant. Nobody goes out wanting to do it. It's a byproduct of war, which is bloody. It's horrible. It's miserable. But it's not my choice to go to war. It's not my decision to go to war. That's made by lords and masters above me. I'm there to discharge my duties as directed. So how do I feel about it? I have a job to do. I get on and do it. I don't have bloodlust. But there's a job to be done. If it's done in self-defense, I have no qualms about it. I've served on operations all over the world. I set my own moral standard. If there was ever a time where I was called to do something that I thought was unjust, unmoral, I wouldn't do it, because I've got to be able to get up in the morning and look at myself in the mirror. And there is an example, and Andrew and I have spoken about this, and it's in Afghanistan, where I was providing cover to American forces going in on an operation. So I was in a tornado. There were some American helicopter gunships supporting the American troops ingressing into a village, and the American gunships decided they had seen fighting age males with weapons. What I'd seen was different. It was elders with staffs leading women and children out of the village because they knew a fight was coming. And the American helicopters were clear to engage. And had I sat and done nothing, I wouldn't have been able to look myself in the mirror. And that would have led to all kinds of problems. However, I decided at that point to put my airplane in between the helicopters shooting and the Afghan people leaving the village, because that was the right thing to do. So again, that's my moral benchline that I'm not prepared to compromise, or wasn't prepared and still not prepared to compromise. Ultimately, that ended up in a situation where I was either going to get a medal for being amazing or get in terrible trouble for interfering with another nation's operations. Sadly, it was the latter, but I wouldn't change what I did for the world because it was the right thing to do.
Thank you.
Rather long-winded, sorry. That was...
Thank you for a superb answer. Question here from Jeff Nelson, who is a colleague in the chemistry department. He's in the CCF, and he is, in fact, an RAF officer, even though we don't have RAF. Do you think that there will be a route within the RAF into flying drones for those who can't meet the medical requirements to be a pilot?
Yes, ultimately. It's changing on a daily basis. So at the moment, it's called RPAS, so remotely piloted air systems. Those individuals do a very small amount of actual live flying before going on to fly the RPAS. I think ultimately, as this situation evolves and greater understanding of medical conditions, then yes, I think the RAF will still impose restrictions, because that's what the military does, because you're not there just as a pilot, you'll be doing other duties as well. You're deployable, you can go and do other things. But I think it might, the requirements will not be, and I don't think they are as high as they used to be in the sort of 20, 25, 30 years ago, that when I applied, that were draconian. So yes, and I think it will only get better for those who didn't fit through that tiny medical box that I initially described.
And we do have another question. I'm looking to join the RAF when I'm older. This is Thomas Church. How hard would you say it is to join as a pilot?
That's a very good question, Thomas. If you're desperately committed and you really want to do it, and when you go there, your enthusiasm is obvious, the RAF will be willing to recruit you, subject to certain caveats, which are you need to pass aptitude tests. So to be a pilot, you need to pass tests that show you have demonstrable capability to be trained as a pilot. You can train yourself in those as well, so it's not cut and dry, and you need to meet medical requirements. So it's only as hard as your commitment allows it to be hard. If you're desperately committed, the elements that are in your control are easy. The things that are out of your control, like medical situations, that is unfortunately out of your control. If you are medically fit to the standard that the RAF require and you pass the aptitude tests and you're desperately committed to do it, and I was as keen as mustard, I genuinely, and Henry, if he's still here, will attest to the fact that there were always RAF pictures up in the wall. And I only ever read books with pictures of aeroplanes in it. That becomes blindingly obvious. And I've interviewed people for the RAF, and it's obvious when people are desperate and they know their stuff. So it's hard insofar as there are strict requirements. If you meet those, you will give yourself the best service you can by demonstrating how desperate you want to do it.
Okay, well, let's have a question from Charles Fournette, who was also in the RAF section at King's and then decided to join the army. And I'm going to say he's now a major.
Can we refer to him as Major Fournette, please?
Yes, I was going to say he's now a major, except he'd probably correct me and say he's reached Lieutenant Colonel. But so he says, "Evening, Ryan. Great to hear a few intriguing stories. You left the RAF when the travel industry was in good order, but clearly the travel industry has taken a whack in the last year. And evidently, like many of your civilian colleagues, you have alternative qualifications and experience to fall back on. Is this year a bit of a a lesson in ensuring that you have a slightly broader portfolio of skills?" And then he says, "P.S. what about the BBMF?"
So yeah, absolutely. I joined the airline industry on it as it was crescendoing. Actually, in 2019 was a bumper year. 2020 pre-pandemic was expected to be even better. All the chat in the airline was expansion. So yeah, absolutely. I fortuitously joined the RAF Reserves, or the Royal Auxiliary Air Force, immediately upon exiting regular service, because I knew there was a certain part of me that I didn't really want to let go. I love being in the service, I'm not going to lie. And situation dictated that I left. So I always had the auxiliaries as an option. Having been former military, there's always an option to rejoin as well, as you will well know. However, in that time, for me, it's been blindingly obvious that I cannot rely on the airline industry to be my sole source of income, because it can come to a hiccup almost instantaneously. Hence why I did more auxiliary work, so with the reserves, and I've created a sort of a niche for myself in the reserves, using my commercial experience actually to bring forth for Wedgetail, which is a new airborne early warning and control aeroplane, because that's going to be a 737 derivative. But equally, I've managed to fall back on some of my defence experience and start a consultancy business, which has actually worked pretty well for me. Whereas guys have asked questions and said, "Can we ask you to do this? Can purely through contacts, actually, I've managed to generate business." And by happenstance, I saw that there was a job offered at the RAF Centrifuge, which required former fast jet pilots, preferably instructors. And I applied and luckily got that job as well. So I have definitely broadened my portfolio to mitigate against any future hiccups that the airline industry will have, because it's over the past year, I've gone through peaks and troughs of worrying about redundancies and going, But again, I'm one of the lucky ones who has a serving squadron leader wife who is in the RAF, who's earning her money, who, keeps the roof over her heads. But I'm very lucky as well that I'm in receipt of a military pension. So my military pension, my serving wife, my other little things, if I lost my job, it wouldn't be the end of the world. I'd be gutted because I love my commercial job. I genuinely do. But yeah, quite right. When you leave the military, it gives you so many skills that, you know what, spread it wide and far and exploit it, quite frankly.
Thank you again for another wonderful answer. And so I'm going to take a question now from Joshua Platt, who says, "Hi, Ryan, thank you so much for such a fantastic talk." And he's spot on there. "You mentioned earlier that if you had your time again, you would have taken a law or languages degree. I'm currently in my final year at King's and planning to study law. How widely available are military and officer careers for potential applicants post-university?"
Good question. So I still harbour ambitions to become a barrister, if that answers your question. I've toyed with doing a graduate diploma in law umpteen times, especially over this year of Well, I've been teaching my children homeschooling, and do you know what? I doff my cap to Andrew because I wouldn't be a teacher for all the tea in China. I used to have hair before the end of lockdown. I mean, if you look at, you know, that's homeschooling.
I used to have brown hair.
So to answer your question, the military writ large, so whether that's the Royal Navy, the Royal Air Force, or the Army, recruits lawyers, whether that be barristers or solicitors, but they have to be qualified before they join the military. I don't believe, and again, I may be speaking slightly out of turn, this is not my area of expertise, that you can join before you have a professional qualification. So getting a pupillage, I know at the moment, to become a barrister is desperately hard. So if you're lucky enough to be able to study law and then go on and get a pupillage to become a barrister, you could join the military, because I know the criminal bar is in a terrible state at the moment. Becoming a solicitor might be a slightly easier route, but becoming a military lawyer will be a fascinating job. I've worked a lot with lawyers, specifically in one of my last deployments to the Middle East, where I was working in the operations center, and I was authorizing weapons strikes with a lawyer sat next to me. So I was in a big operations center in the Middle East, talking to jets, talking to drone pilots. They would give me a target and I would look at it, and I had the approval, the delegated approval from the Secretary of State of Defense down to my level as I was in the military. So yes or no, you can drop that weapon. And they always had to go through the operations center. One of us we each did 12-hour shifts and we rotated. So you will find some of it utterly fascinating. And again, equally, if you want to talk more about the law and the military, I'm happy to take that offline and give my details as well. So that's a carte blanche, actually. Anybody who wants to talk about, chat to me offline about specific stuff, I'm more than happy to do that.
I'm going to take a question now from Edouard Vitry, who is the current head of CCF at King's, which might upset Adam Vintner, who thinks he is. You mentioned earlier that your cooperation with the US Air Force, how much of your job in the RAF was involved with other countries? That's from Edouard de Vitry, who's currently the head of CCF at King's.
Okay, loads. So a lot of the operations, the warfighting operations, were coalition operations. So I've got colleagues who are now friends, several Germans, French, Italians, Chileans, a lot of Americans, Canadians, Afghans. I worked a lot with the Afghan Air Force in the development of the Afghan Air Force at certain points. So, do you know what? By virtue of the fact of being on coalition operations and operating in diverse areas, I've got a really broad church of friends, and actually quite good friends. I've got a German friend from the German Air Force who flew Tornadoes, actually, who until the pandemic, we used to meet up every year. And no matter where we were in the world, we would always find time. And he managed to find time to come to our wedding. Do you remember Ollie, Andrew? German Ollie?
No.
A very gregarious character. So, yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time working with the Americans. But again, equally, I spent a lot of time working with the British Army. For example, I was never stovepiped in the RAF. Of my 22 years service in the RAF, I think probably spent a good 3 or 4 years with the British Army as well. And that was on the ground in places I wish I hadn't been. And I don't know how I got there, but I ended up on the ground with the British Army, and not all regular units as well. And it was, no, I shouldn't be here. I'm not qualified or good enough to do this kind of stuff. This is crazy.
And there's no 5-star hotel. So question from Misha Jarrams. What was the scariest or most dangerous situation you've been in? Don't mention my tutor group.
Okay, so this is a really easy question to answer, because I ended up in a situation that I really shouldn't have been in. So I was on the ground in Afghanistan. I got plucked out of I was just finished the Tornado display, actually, Christmas 2006. And on my birthday, which is in December, I got flown to Afghanistan, and I ended up in Afghanistan working for an irregular task force who said, can you go to Kabul for us, please, to attend a time-sensitive targeting meeting? Well, yeah, I can do that, no problem. Because, yeah, you won't be wearing a uniform. You need to go in your jeans. Fine, okay. Or civilian clothes, don't wear your uniform. and I got on an unmarked airplane. And looking back now, there was no manifest. There was nobody knew I was on that airplane. Nobody knew where I was going. I ended up in Kabul. I ended up putting on a Afghan local dress and putting a pistol down my jeans, which I'd never done before. Met by a very hairy, scary man who took me to a safe house. And to say I was petrified is an understatement. I ended up with, I think they were spies. I think they were other forms of soldiers in the military that we're not allowed to discuss. I don't really know. I didn't really ask any questions. I was too frightened to. They were very hairy. There were lots of guns. It was in the middle of Kabul and there was no normal military stuff around. And I ended up organizing or helping organize how they sorted out what's called time-sensitive targeting. And yes, so an airman out of his comfort zone on the ground, incognito, where he shouldn't have been, utterly petrified. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I had Harry Potter on my little MP3 player in my earplugs, and that kept me sane at the time.
Another one from Jeff Nelson. Are you concerned about the Boeing 737 MAX safety after the US safety review? Does the plane now have features that will allow a pilot full control should problems arise? I know you fly the 800, not the MAX, but...
Okay. I've asked for data because at the moment, until I fully understand it, I wouldn't put my family or myself on a MAX because I don't understand it myself. And that's probably because I fly 737s and I want to understand the MCAS system, which I don't fully understand. So I know it's cleared by the regulators. So without taking a party line, the regulators have clearly been demonstrated to you by Boeing that the airplane is safe to fly. I know there are certain conditions where if the airplane misbehaved, you can effect certain actions to mitigate any risk. However, would I have the confidence for that pilot to know that with my 2 children and my wife? No, probably not. So until I fully understood it, I wouldn't get on the airplane, but that's just me because I would want to understand it. But again, one would have to trust the regulator, but then we trusted the regulator with the FAA and look what happened. So again, that's a really good question. Bottom line is no, at the moment, I wouldn't put for example, the first operator probably to fly Maxes in the UK will be Ryanair. We will not fly, and my wife's a pilot and she's adamant she won't get on them. We won't be getting on a Max with Ryanair, that's for sure.
Okay.
Personal opinion only, obviously.
When we first kind of mooted this talk, one of the things I suggested to you was maybe bringing Jane in on this. And we did say that maybe it would be better to do a second talk. This has been a very, very popular talk, I have to say. But an interesting question from someone anonymous, I'm afraid. Great talk and very interesting. My daughter is thinking of joining the RAF as a pilot. What's it like to be a female pilot? And I appreciate that the answer won't be firsthand. So obviously you can't really tell us what it's like, but you are married to a female RAF pilot. And so you probably do have sufficient information to give us some kind of answer on that one.
Yeah, okay. So with the big fat caveat that I'm a male answering this question, you will be in the minority. However, you're treated as an equal. You are judged on your ability, not your creed, color, sexual preference, or anything else. And to put it in context, 8 years ago, I was flying in Afghanistan, a formation of 2 airplanes, 4 individuals, and I was the only male in the formation. The other 3 people in the formation were females. So there was an American exchange officer in the back of the Tornado with me, and 2 girls, Sasha and Sophie, in the other airplane. And you know what? Makes no difference. I and the rest of the military judge you on your ability, and we're one team. The rest of it I don't really care about. I genuinely don't care about. I never have done. As long as you deliver on your professional ability, that's fine. And the military is becoming more and more diverse and inclusive every single day. So if your daughter is considering joining the military, yes, absolutely do it. There are no stoppers. When my wife went through, there are a few old and bold pilots who thought it was wrong, because when I was at school, females weren't allowed to be pilots in the Royal Air Force, which is clearly bonkers. However, times have changed significantly since then. And you know what? Girls are not in the majority by any stretch of the imagination, but they hold their own. I mean, one of my very, very good friends, Tornado Navigator, she's been the first squadron boss. So she led a squadron of Tornadoes. She's now the station commander of the base in Cyprus. So yeah, it's a perfectly, it's an environment that doesn't care about your sex.
Well, we also have Alex Hyatt, of course, that was in the CCF at King's, who's now squadron leader, engineering officer. But I think she has a fabulous time in the RAF.
It is. It's what you make it. And like I say, people judge you on your professional ability, nothing else. And that's it.
Alexandra, do you want to ask a question?
Oh, there she is.
That's all. Set that off, Andrew. That's quite scary.
Hello, Alex.
Just need to unmute yourself, Alexandra.
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, no, I was literally just trying to say I agree with everything that Ryan's just said. From, you know, I've done a couple less years than yourself, Ryan. I don't know if, hopefully you remember me at Marham. I can't remember.
I do. Yeah, Andrew and I were talking about it the other day, actually. Have you been promoted? Have you been promoted yet? I'm sure I was saying you must be a wing commander by now.
Yeah. I've been a wing commander for about 5 years now.
There you go. Told you.
My bad.
Congratulations.
My bad.
Oh no, not at all, no problem. So whoever was asking that question, everything Ryan has just said is absolutely spot on. You get judged on your ability. No one cares about anything other than whether or not you can do your job well. And if you can't do your job well, then you'll pay for that. And if you do your job well, they'll be very happy to work with you. And that's all there is to it. I will stop talking now. I don't know how to turn this off. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alex.
No, it's nice to see you.
Good to see you again, even though it's just Alexandra Hyatt. Now, Greg's appeared, who can be the sort of the great executioner.
Go on, have one more question for yourself.
Okay, so let's ask one more question, and let's go for would you be happy to share your thoughts about battery powered and also single piloted and pilotless commercial aircraft? And I think you've mentioned pilotless aircraft, but not battery powered.
So single piloted first or remotely piloted. Interestingly, I put a proposal forward for a PhD thesis on single pilot and remotely piloted commercial airplanes. So the future for me is definitely single piloted commercial airplanes, leading on to commercially piloted airplanes with no pilots. And you know what, there's a simple reason for that. It's driven by economics, and then it's driven by people's attitudes. I see the next generation of commercial airplanes with a single pilot, and I see a pilot sitting on the ground with a bank monitoring 6 airplanes. If one of them has a problem, he then diverts his sole attention to become the virtual co-pilot to that one. Another guy steps in and monitors the other 5 airplanes. Ultimately, the next step will then be remotely piloted commercial airplanes. And you know what? The airlines will ultimately take that role because it will make them more money. Simple. Yeah. That's driven purely by fiscal sense, and it'll be fiscal drivers that do it. Battery powered, electric powered. Yeah, the technology is evolving. I'm a big fan of hydrogen as well. I think there's clean options with that as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm a member of the Aeronautical Society and a couple of their working groups, and absolutely, I mean, my view is it is the future. There are derivatives of power other than using oil-based fuels, and yeah, absolutely. As soon as technology can get it to a point where we can commercially and viably use them, let's do it. Absolutely, why not?
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed, Ryan. I'm sure that Greg is going to wind things up, but just from me, thanks very much indeed for an excellent talk. And thanks to thanks to Jane for lending you to us for an hour, maybe getting out from under her seat, I don't know. But if I now hand back control to Greg and he will say the final things, but thanks very much indeed.
My pleasure.
Look, I'd just firstly like to thank Andrew so much for leading the interview today with aplomb and facilitating the questions so wonderfully well of Ryan. Ryan, thank you for sharing your passion for flying, hearing of your stories in the RAF and as a commercial pilot. And the thing that struck me the most is how much the human side you brought to the talk, and actually the value systems that clearly you hold was really quite inspiring. So thank you so much for that. And just on that, it's wonderful to hear and see the bonds you formed with your removed tutor Andrew, and also hearing the stories of those strong friendships that were sort of found at King's, and it sort of highlights everything that's wonderful about our fine school. So thank you so much, Ryan, for sharing that with us today and joining us tonight.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for letting me talk.
Yep.
Thanks again, Ryan.
Finally, we got one more week until half term, and just over a week, and our final King's talk of the half term is next Wednesday night. Our OKS King's talk from Imogen Hirsch, presenting Bringing Heads Together to Change the Conversation on Mental Health. So it's a real focus on mental health, quite up in this Children's Mental Health Week this week. Interviewing Imogen will be Matt Thornby, former schoolhouse housemaster, but current head of boarding practice. So I hope to see you next Wednesday night. Thank you so much again, Andrew and Ryan. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And, have a good night. Thank you.